This episode is proudly sponsored by Amber L. Contact us today to learn how you can be a part of the vibration experience. Good evening and welcome to Vibration, where we empower individuals to speak their distinct truth, passions, and personal message on a global online stage. I'm your host, Michelle McDonald, passionate foodie, author, and entrepreneur. And tonight I give a special thank you to our show sponsor, Amber L. In continuing with our theme, Bahamian roots, history, and culture, we will focus on the topic, from whence we came, reconnecting with our African lineage. Our guest tonight is Christopher mo-Shango Davis, who is a researcher, historical interpreter, storyteller, and author. Christopher was born in Nassau, Bahamas, with a love and appreciation of history that was instilled in him from a very young age, particularly through his roots in Cat Island, a stronghold of African customs, culture, and heritage. After a successful career in beach soccer, his talents and energy were tirelessly dedicated to resurrecting African history in the Bahamas as it relates to the wider African diaspora. He has worked as a researcher for the Antiquities, Monuments, and Museum Corporation for several years and was stationed at the Pompeii Museum of Slavery and Emancipation for the last 7 years. At the museum, he interprets history and gives presentations to people of all persuasions on African history, resistance to slavery, the Mafa, and modern-day slavery. Christopher went far beyond his requirements, dedicating thousands of hours of research, which led to new historical perspectives and the founding of African Glory in 2017, the entity which brought Dr. Umar Johnson to the Bahamas for the first time in 2018. Christopher has done numerous radio interviews and presentations all over North America, and is also an authority on Pan-Africanism and African history in the Bahamas at a young age. In his first major global project, the first volume of a planned series of research, Sankofa Flamingo, was completed, seeking to not only assert the Bahamas' place in the MAFA, but also challenging much of the historical propaganda that continues to hinder African progress. Quote, debunking the white man's rhetoric in the Bahamas and wider diaspora, end quote. Here, Christopher is also the founder and director, linking the history of many different nations through the rediscovery of Junkanoo. mo-Shango's first book is loaded with seminal research involving many nations and happenings within the diaspora. Christopher is inspired by the lights of Dr. John Henry Clark, Chief Anta Diop, and Walter Rodney. mo-Shango's future is bright in the world of African scholarship. mo-Shango, welcome to the stage tonight.
You wrote that, or was that? I never actually heard all of that. But the person that did the bio, I'd like to thank them. Shout out to Brother Robin and Mike and Queen Mother Angelique, and of course my lovely, lovely wife Tamara Davis. And of course Ras Corper as well. I think they put that together nicely for me, and I just sent it. So yeah, it's pretty flattering. It's kind of long, but thank you very much. That's probably the best intro I ever had. But yeah, good to be here, and thanks for having me on. This is a platform that I'm very much looking forward to being on. And it's been a long time coming.
I agree. And hey, I had to introduce you properly, okay? Because you have done a lot for Bahamian history. You're continuing to do it. You are inspiring our youth in this area. And you're bringing a lot of enlightenment that the Bahamian people just aren't familiar with. So I say, hey, they got to know you from the start. What you say?
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah.
So we know professionally how your journey has led to the formation of Sankofa Flamingo, but we want to hear more about your passions. how did you find yourself deeply connected to historical research and to the birth of this educational nonprofit organization?
Well, it really started when the passion started in my young adulthood. And as I grow older, I think I probably become more and more radical, but it was just a more than a passion, even an obsession, And even while I was doing other things as a student, 'cause I didn't even initially study history, even though I'm, of course, doing that now. But it was just a passion of mine. My father, my grandfather, the connection to Kid Island, Exuma, and it was just a real passion of mine. And funnily enough, when I was in school, I didn't even realize, in high school, I should say, I didn't even realize it was that much of a passion. I actually viewed history as something I did not like. But that was because I did not have any, let's say, Pan-African fervor when I was in high school. I was very much lost and going on a certain road. And my epiphany came with my exposure not only to my family, but listening to different types of music, actually. Artists like Capleton, Norris Mann, Sizzler had a profound effect on me, too. I used to wonder why they seemingly have so much hatred for institutions that we are conditioned to love here in the Bahamas, particularly if you go to a private school or anything like that. And then as I traveled and gained exposure, started to read a lot. And then I discovered, some of the people that you mentioned, and there are many, many more, much of whom are Caribbean scholars. And I started to discover some of their lectures on YouTube, got my hands on their books, and I just began to hang on their every word. And then when I started at AMMC, because when I first came at AMMC, I was pretty well versed on general African history and global Black politics and all of these things. I was in my mid to late 20s, and by then though, that's when I was like, you know what, I really need to bring this home. I started to think about our history a little more now, and even when I was much younger, I asked my father a question, and I was like, how come nobody ever really did anything just focusing on African history in Africa? And I love to say it has been done. Also, this was years ago when I said this, and he pretty much sucked his teeth at me and said, well, why you don't do it? And so all of these things, and there are several even people in the Pan-African community in the Bahamas who have also had a profound effect on me. Mr. Andrew Wilson, as I call her, Queen Mother, Dr. Jacinta Hicks.
Oh, yeah.
I put the Queen Mother first, not the doctor, and many senior members of the Rastafari community, people like Priest Rittman, Javon, Tafari, Davis, people like that. These were people that, I hung around with. I used to bug them all the time when I was quite young, and they used to get tired of me and all of that. And all I wanted to do as I became when I was a young adult, was just sit down and talk about Black history and Blackness. And it actually started out with a lot of conspiracy theories, like when I was 19, I was hard on Alex Jones, and stuff like that. But it was all a part of my journey to bring me here, and I like to say that Pan-Africanism, or I should say African liberation, is my religion, and I take it very seriously. And I'm proud to say that me and the NGO with my team, including, of course, Robin and my wife are the co-founders with me, but we also have directors, Angelique McKay, Michael Pateman, Ras Copper, a.k.a. Oswald White, and several others who are very much involved with what we're doing as well. We've also been forming some very strategic partnerships as well.
Nice.
And I could just let the people know, we have unequivocally proven not only the origins of Junkanoo, but essentially a specific African group that we could point to say has a distinct and very, very close connection to us, and the most beautiful thing, they're known as the Ahanta people, A-H-N-T-A. And one of the most beautiful things is they're actually pining for people to return home. And even if you, on all different levels, you come to live, they'll give you land and live and all, or you can just visit, and experience the origins of many aspects of our culture, even far beyond Junkanoo, right? So And then when I started to go to Ghana, me and my wife went for the first time tomorrow. Queen Mother, I should say, tomorrow. Asafahima, Nkosahimi, and Princess Town. All of these are her titles, you know. She is all queened up, as we like to say now as well. But,
Beautiful.
yeah, but you know, so it's just been something quite profound. And though I am one of the people, the leader of the Sankofa Flamingo Foundation or organization, I wouldn't have been able to do everything without the people behind me, especially my wife, you know, brother Robin, co-founders. And then since Mike came on, you know, the research has just exploded, you know, on a whole nother level. And we're working on documentaries, of which Mike and Robin are the executive producers. And of course, Queen Mother Angelique, most people know as Angelique Bahamian Culture, aka the Junkanoo goddess. And she really has also brought another profound aspect to the Sankofa Flamingo Foundation. And it essentially began as me writing a book. And I was essentially, at first, I was afraid that I wasn't going to be able to write enough. And I ended up writing probably about 600 pages and I had to turn it into 2 books. And the next one will be next year. But this first one, and then certain aspects of the research, like maroons, for example, the origins of Junkanoo. As I started to do more research and things that caused me to extend the release of the book was just some of the more profound things that I had to put in there. And then, of course, Mike came in and say, man, you got to keep me a little disciplined. It's like, listen, man, anything else you can put in the next book, but you got to get something out because this is a lot right here for people to consider, you know? And so it's just been a profound journey for the past year. I've been to Ghana about 7, 8 times for the past year. And there's a lot that's happening, and it's a lot of opportunities, believe it or not, that Bahamians will be able to see as well in traveling to Ghana, and even more specifically in traveling to the Hunter region, if even not just for the cultural fulfillment and the personal fulfillment of returning to the proverbial motherland. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for that. One of the biggest things that I took away from what you said is that representation matters, because the fact that you did not connect with history in high school, but right now you are at the point of not just passion or even obsession, as you stated, like this is your life's goal. It really showed that if you had that representation back then, it would have made a difference. But hey, timing is everything. You're here now, and you are now the representation that a lot of Bahamians need in understanding where we come from, where certain aspects of our culture is connected to. And you also mentioned unity, your team that has come together, strengthening the entire organization, you know, providing all of the things that they are good at and merging them into one. And I know that this is an aspect of symbolism that is mentioned on your website as well. So there's unity, there's freedom, there's also the Sankofa bird. And so I'd like you to tell us a bit more as to how these connect with the Sankofa Flamingo Foundation, just so we can kind of put the puzzle together.
Oh, yeah. Well, the logo, and of course, I know that you, Ms. McDonald, are very much familiar with the anchor symbols of Ghana and what they represent. So those who are familiar with those symbols will take one look at our logo, the Sankofa Flamingo logo. And you can kind of see some of the symbols, and you can look at what the symbols mean. So the pupil of the bird, it actually looks like this very abstract kind of splash or star at first glance. But what it actually is, 2 crocodiles joined at the stomach. And in the traditional Ahanta language, it's Fenton Funfunu, Denchen Funfunu. And essentially means Siamese crocodiles. And if you think about it, if 2 crocodiles are joined at the stomach, if they don't cooperate and unify and work together, both of them will perish, especially when you think of the nature of a crocodile, right? And that is probably the most extreme example that you could think about of having to be unified with anything, you know what I mean? And that is the symbol that represents unity in diversity. So it means no matter what our differences, so that could be down to family ties, all the way up to belonging to a different group or being of a different nationality. Once you are African and of a certain ilk, we should all be unified. And particularly this speaks to us politically, which is something that I notice that a lot of us don't actually look at. You know, we argue over religion, who should pray this way and what's the truth, and we argue over even history. You know, sometimes we dwell, I'm an historian, I could say, we dwell too much on history, just dwelling on the past, romanticizing the past, oftentimes, as people might accuse me of doing, you know what I mean? But at the same time, we often forget the mission at hand today. And we are getting to a place where we kind of equate quote unquote African freedom to conformity to Western society, you know, as opposed to being Yoruba again, you know, being a hunter again, you know, being a Congo again, you know, speaking to some of the groups that we know make up a large majority of the groups that came to the Bahamas, you know. So, and it doesn't mean that you see, a lot of times too, people think they often use the term "go back to Africa," you know, and it's always this kind of thing where they think that we're going back. So, of course, history shows us that many African civilizations were far advanced, but this is also something that happens that we still see fleetingly in our more modern history, particularly in surprising places like Haiti, where we have the so-called mythos of the Haitian zombie, which actually originates as a form of crime and punishment in a place called Mayombe in the Congo. You know, that's very closely associated with certain aspects of what we know as voodoo in Haiti, Obia in the Bahamas, and we from Kid Island, so we know the stigmas surrounding that, and even a religion called Palo Mayombe that is quite popular throughout Latin America. And what this was is a form of crime and punishment that actually affected the mind. No different than you going to see a psychiatrist because you have a certain mental instability, you understand? And that may cause you to be more violent, and you take a pill to make you less violent, you see? But in the time and space of colonization and enslavement, many aspects of our sciences manifested in that space. So this was in time to just talk about things. You know, we were essentially trying to survive, trying to protect ourselves, trying to fight against slavery. And so this is why things like zombification manifested. And as a matter of fact, it was when U.S. soldiers invaded Haiti in the early 1900s. This is what birthed the modern U.S. Horror film industry. You know, the first films were about zombies and the Night of the Living Dead. You know, there's a book by Wade Davis, who was an American chemist and psychologist, I believe, an anthropologist, sorry. And he actually studied this quote-unquote zombie powder. And what they do is they use the TTX from the blowfish, which is the same thing that kind of would paralyze you or kill you if you eat too much blowfish in Japan. And then they use a very common strain of plant known as Datura stramonium, also known as nightshade, to give you this antidote. And then you are quote-unquote zombie. But what it does is it makes you stupidly obedient. But that practice was only done to the worst of people in that community, in that ancient society in Mayombe. This is something that translated into the New World and was used to fight against the Maafa, if you will. The Maafa being a Swahili word coined by the great scholar by the name of Marimba Ani. Okay? And Maafa just means the great and horrible happening, which has been the fate of the majority of people of African descent, despite how big this one house might be, despite how much money this celebrity might be making, despite how high these basketball players in the NBA. Not saying that we shouldn't celebrate Black excellence within this space, but it's saying, you get what I'm saying. I don't think I need to elaborate on that, you know. And I don't want to dwell too much on that because I want to bring some things a little closer to home. But I just wanted people to kind of grasp some of the concepts that we push in Sankofa Flamingo. You know, it's not even just me. There are other people with very profound concepts, particularly Robin, that even disagree with me on certain aspects from a Pan-African standpoint, you know. But what it is, again, is that unity and diversity, that pupil that you see in the Sankofa bird. And the flamingo, I just modified the Sankofa bird to look a little bit more like a flamingo, which of course is the national bird of the Bahamas. But also, if you know how flamingos live, Even in the Bahamas, we see this. When people come there and things come around that they don't want around, all of them get together in unison and they just pick up and go and they leave that behind and they go. And this is not to say that we're disregarding history, of course, but in the political sense, this is what we have to do. And when we start to acknowledge this history, recontextualize and change the narrative of our history and view it in the correct way, in unison, and this becomes a part of the common psyche of people of African descent. This is when organically, because people just be like, oh, what you think the solution is? It's going to happen organically. It's just that enough of us are not yet, let's say, on code, as Charlemagne the God like to say, and that's what it boils down to. When enough of us start to realize the reality of it, and unfortunately, the way that things are set up, as we become more educated, as the great historian Dr. Clark said, that most academic institutions are also institutions of de-Africanization. I just discovered not discovered, let me know you use that word. I just found, I should say, a document talking about Christopher Columbus, and it just says that it's the journal of Christopher Columbus, but it's in fact doctored. So when he arrived to the Bahamas, they just have him talking about how he's hoping to Christianize the so-called Indians, right? But because he thought he was actually in Asia, that's why we call all indigenous Americans the misnomer Indian, right? However, when all that happened, they omitted the part where he said pretty much first quarter, the first time we see them, oh yeah, and these people submissive, they can make good slaves, in a nutshell. That was, and so what Dr. Clark also spoke about was something called the academic mafia. And these were things that people warned us about. Our great scholars all the way back to the 1700s warned us about this. And what did they warn us about? Them allowing us to believe that we are somehow compliant in the Ma'afa. African people are the only people that receive blame for genocide, a genocide that affects them. And it's no coincidence that the groups, the Ashanti, the Dahomey, the Yoruba, these same groups that they love to chastise and misrepresent as the great profiteers of the transatlantic slave trade, which is not true in any fractional sense. You understand? Not true in any fractional sense, are the same groups that put up the greatest fight during a period of history that is completely disregarded, known as the Scramble for Africa, which you could argue is worse than slavery. As a matter of fact, it killed numerous times more Africans than the transatlantic slave trade did in a shorter space of time. And this is the period leading from the so-called end of British slavery in the late 1830s, leading right up into about the 1920s, 1930s. This period, millions upon millions of Africans were absolutely slaughtered. And this was where the last and final blows were dealt to all great African kingdoms, to the point where the reality is they lack political power. So none of them, no traditional African council could go, as a nation to the UN or to these things. Not that the UN wouldn't hear them, but they don't go as a nation as would the United States of America, the Bahamas, Jamaica would go. You understand?
Interesting, yeah.
The reality is we as African people lack political power, but we ain't focusing on politics. And politics is what will unify us, and we can learn about our politics, of course, through our history. And politics is in the middle, and everything else, economics, history, everything else branches off of it. And now you're just dealing with a very important factor, which is the history. Not for us to just dwell on it and talk about how great we once were. Of course, that is great for us and our self-esteem living in this world that we're living in. But we need to use that in a practical way. That will work in this society that we're in today, in this world that we're living in today. Yeah, I hope I'm blabbling on too much.
No, not at all. You were actually just letting us know, how deeply the symbolism is representative of Sankofa Flamingo, what it means, how history connects to so many other aspects of who we are as individuals, as countries, and the sacrifices that other Africans in other countries have made
Yeah.
in the name of where they're from, what they stand for, what they represent, and just how
Right.
everything all aligns together. So we appreciate you providing that clarity to us, especially for persons who are not history buffs. This really gets them to kind of understand how it all
Right.
sits.
Yes.
So our history as a country and as individuals bind us, providing a sense of place and in many ways telling us who we are and where we come from. It also provides clarity amidst unanswered questions, which, as you could admit to at a young age, especially in high school, you had as well. When you even asked your father, is this being talked about? He said yes, but you needed more. I need to see more of this, and he challenged you to do it. So would you agree with this statement about how valuable history is, and that preserving and teaching the history of the Bahamas is essential to our next generation?
Oh yeah. This is a human thing. This ain't even just about the bombers. History is the lifeblood of every single subject. Every subject you study is based in history because someone figured out the best methodology in science or whatever. They figured out how to do addition. They figured out algebra and all this, and all of this was preserved. These techniques were preserved through time. How is that done?
Mm-hmm.
So it's the lifeblood of every subject because it's all based on precedence and the best, kind of precedence of whatever the goal is for whatever the subject is. Now in the Bahamas, in our context, I believe that there are several reasons why, for some reason, we don't focus or we don't value or haven't valued our history as much as we should have, right? So one of them, I will go with the easy one, which pretty much isn't our fault, and it speaks more to our modern history. And this is one of the observations I have personally made over the years. When you look at the nations that we surrounded by our neighbors, so you have the United States. You get right now about 40 million blacks up there. But of course, we know the treatment that they receive, the lynchings and all of this stuff. Cuba had a class revolution in 1959. Side note, Stafford Sands is not the father of Bahamian terrorism. He's not a national hero. He fought against the founding of the Bahamas. So how could you make a national hero of someone that was against the founding of that specific nation? Side note, Castro would be the father of terrorism because he won the socialist revolution and all the people stopped going to Cuba and say we need to go to other places. That is how terrorism. And then Stafford Sands with his buddies just build a couple hotels for him and his boys, with a couple casinos. He was a Nazi sympathizer, but somehow he's still on our $10 bill, right? But sorry to digress, but what was the question again?
So the question was talking about how
Yeah.
valuable our history is in
Okay.
the sense that we should preserve it and share it with our
Right.
next generations.
Right. Well, there you go. Just now, I think the $10 bill is a good example. See, and people might think it don't matter, but you automatically think when you see on a $10 bill that the person on the money, the statue in the middle of the quad, is a hero, because that is a space designated for national heroes or heroes of a particular community. And this, in my opinion, goes much, much deeper. So if you have Christopher Columbus statue in the seat, in the head of your government, which is problematic in itself, because it shows that we actually don't have much sovereignty from that perspective, because the royal family still represents our head of state. You understand? But when you look at Columbus, what you telling the youth, yeah, he was a murderer. Yeah, he was a rapist. Yeah, he was all a thief and all these things that are complete, insane, religious, dogmatic. You know what I mean? But at the same time, I guess it's okay, because he's still considered a hero, man. I guess the ends justify the means. All these are things that are swirling around in the youth's head, and subconsciously, even though most people have turned on Christopher Columbus. Then you have Queen Victoria. It's almost as if we have selected the worst of the worst people to become national heroes. But when you look at the people who wrote books like The Making of the Bahamas, for example, I'm sure you're familiar with this book. We are familiar with this book. They are still using this book. And this book was written right before independence by the same group of people controlling Queen's College, the school that I attended, by the way. You understand? Which was recently segregated just a few years before that. This the same book that gives credit to Penelope Feeney, Governor Feeney's so-called wife, and this is connected to Junkanoo, by the way. They give her credit for starting the straw market in the Bahamas, when they the ones that own the slave ship that bring the first Africans directly from Africa to the Bahamas that started the straw industry in the Bahamas. You see how they twist the history around? So moving into another reason why. So the fear of us being surrounded by all the quote-unquote worst examples, and of course Haiti freed themselves from slavery, won the greatest revolution in human history, and they were made to pay for it. $22 billion to France. Most of their gold reserves are now in the United States Federal Reserve, and yet you have these so-called liberal news channels still making documentaries and doing news stories about why is Haiti so poor, you know? And in my opinion, for us who consistently show xenophobia and complain about the influx of Haitian migrants who are only trying to survive at the end of the day, I think some of us beginning to understand that that's how we solve that problem. We put the pressure on those nations that are responsible for that. You understand? But these nations continue to bully us when we do these things, you know, and then they tell us we got to do this, then they move the proverbial goalpost again. Oh, well, now you got to do this, and they move the goalpost again. You know, how is it that we label this an unethical tax haven when Liechtenstein, Switzerland, and all these European nation union members doing it on a far larger scale than the Bahamas is? You have islands within the nation of Britain doing the same thing we doing, but they don't get these labels and they don't get sanctioned in the way that we do. Why is that? Because we still a colony in their mind. You understand? But we don't acknowledge these things. We don't like to see these things. If we appreciated our history, we would see these things for what they are. We are presented the takeover of Woodes Rogers as a good thing. We are presented us becoming a British colony as a good thing, and we call it and we disguise it as the ending of piracy. We had a mulatto leader, head of state, for about a year and a half in the Bahamas during our so-called days of piracy. And I'm not trying to praise the pirates because that they themselves were slave trading, but Woodes Rogers himself was an avid slave trader, massive slave trader. The second slave ship to come directly from the Bahamas to here was by Woodes Rogers. Why we don't hear stories about this? This is no secret. You can go on their Wikipedia page. The information is right there. You know, I ain't do no special research to find out these things. I ain't do no special research to find out Stafford Sands is a Nazi sympathizer. On his Wikipedia page is a picture with him and Hitler's former minister of economics, who wrote books about keeping people like us subservient to their former colonial masters. And what's our industries, you know? And it's not our fault. And I'm not saying we shouldn't support our industries because people need to survive. You know, we need to do what we need to do. But at the same time, you know, we have actually forgotten the mission. And that moves me into the next reason and kind of answer to your question, which is one of our big blessings is also our big curses, which is our proximity to the United States and our tourism just being our biggest industry and us being heavily reliant on it. You know, I had a great professor at the University of the Bahamas, Badia Seymour, shout out to her if she ever sees this, you know, and she completely took me aback in the very first lesson, and it just enthused me like that when she said there's a big difference between service and servitude. You know, and this is also connected to that. But because tourism, especially back in those days, of course, back in those days, you could understand because you can't talk about slave revolts when all of these white tourists, the majority of whom, realistically speaking, would have been racist or had racist sentiments. You can't be talking about slave revolts and saltwater underground railroad when you bring them to tour your country in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, 70s. Some people still feel like that today. And even within the Ministry of Tourism, you know, you could see, you know, that there is a very conservative narrative and there's a very much a need for a more radical narrative, which is, I could confidently say, beginning to happen, you know, as you could see, you know, and there's this new buzz about history, which I'm very much grateful for. But our history is extremely important. It even goes beyond surnames and stuff like that. It is extremely important. And the importance of it can actually be accurately measured.
Yes, thank you for that. And I really like how you emphasize that it's not only important for us to know our history, but also to share the right narrative and
Right,
be able to pass on words of wisdom to our youth so that they understand the different parts of representation that they see, right?
right,
They see how it all comes together. How was this country made? This country that I am a part of, that I'm
right,
so proud to be in, that I want to raise my family and take with me wherever I go.
right.
And so that really brings a lot of light into that area that a lot of people don't focus on as much. But as you stated, history is everywhere, it's in every part that we do. And so it's something that should be highly valued and appreciated
Of course.
at all times, especially when it comes to your hometown.
Right. So another comment too, that I could make about it all is that when you look at our history, it's actually quite unique and quite profound, and
I
history is
agree.
the greatest unifying force. And when we talk about nations in the Caribbean, even though we could appreciate being Bahamian or being Jamaican or being Trinidadian or whatever nation it may be, you know, in my opinion, it should not matter beyond, say, the Olympics. When we run it again, that's the only time we're supposed to have a problem with Jamaica, Olympic time, or when we play in their basketball team. Because when our history is truly looked at, it will unify us. Because what you will notice is, number one, there's literally not much a difference between us besides our cultural practices in the space that we live in. We all come from the same places. When you see the contributions that each nation has made, Joseph Robert Love is a nation who was born right there over the hill, and christening St. Agnes and all of this stuff right there over the hill, was the teacher of Marcus Garvey and is a national hero in Jamaica. And of course, we know the influence that Jamaica has had on the Bahamas, despite people who may or may not be willing to admit it. You can just turn on the radio to hear the influence that Jamaica has. Every DJ in the Bahamas, they don't speak Kalakichi when they talking on the mic. Most of them speak in Patois. All right, then. Yeah, and we have more reggae artists probably than any other artist, probably more than Rake and Scrape and whatever. I'm not even implying that that's a bad thing. I'm just admitting to the influence, the cultural influence that they have. Same with Haiti, not even just through our blood, but when you see the volume of so-called Haitians that came here during the Haitian Revolution, it's almost irrational to claim that you don't have Haitian blood. This is impossible to know. So that's first of all, and when we get down to these facts, and that's including if you're light skinned with green eyes and curly hair, it's probably more true if you light skinned, as a matter of fact. Because back in those days, the majority of Haitians who were coming outside of those who were enslaved were light skinned. The most famous being, Stephen Dillard, his brother John Goodman, who Goodman's Bay is named after. Then you have those really, really bad guys like Francis Montel, who Montel Heights is named after. So you can see the influence is there. And even though we spell Connect, Guinep, we say what? Connect. But how they spell it in Haiti though? Kenep. So we say it like the Haitians say it. That's where it comes from. You see, so we need to get over these things, and that's my greatest shame as a Bahamian right there, the xenophobia that we sometimes show to our Caribbean brothers and sisters, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I think that is good for us to kind of remember that we are all a part of the same region, right? We all share different types of history together, and that means something, right? So we should be respectful of them, appreciative of what it is that they bring to us, and in the same sense, they are able to as well appreciate who we are and what we bring.
Unity in diversity. That's all it is.
There you go.
I, as a Bahamian, I say peas and rice. You all say rice and peas.
Rice and peas.
You all have better male runners. We have better female runners. Even though they'll probably argue they have better female runners too. But we better at the quarter mile for sure. You know what I mean? So,
yes.
But this is the type of vibration it should be. And it should not go beyond that. And it's so sad. I'll just drop this on your channel. cuz, my kid island cousin. It's so sad, the origins of Haitian xenophobia in this country. And what has happened is we have actually adopted the sentiment and the opinions of the slave master and the British colonial settler. Because in 1797, there was actually a so-called plot discovered by a mixture of both Haitian and Bahamian, I might add. As a matter of fact, some of the leaders were Bahamian, not Haitian, but they like to put it all on the Haitians. You know what I'm saying? And the sentiments in the Bahamas among the slave masters, among the governors and the colonial sycophants, if you will, was that, oh, these Haitians came here and corrupted the good Negroes. Oh, they coming here to take over. Oh, they coming here to turn us bad. Oh, you see that fellow who commit that murder? He's the Haitian. These things we hear commonly. You understand? And these are the same sentiments that were being echoed, particularly leading up to and since 1797. So in a nutshell, I say that to say this. We hate them because they tried to free us from slavery. I should rephrase that. Some of us hate them because they tried to free us from slavery. And that's a tough pill to swallow. And it makes you wonder what side of the historical spectrum does the Bahamas really belong on. And that also comes up too in some of these enclosed rooms that I had. And this is one of the things that galvanized me as well. People say, kind of saying, this one saying, yeah, Queen Nani, Trinidadians talking about all their great scholars like C.L.R. James and Padmore, and of course the late great Eric Williams, and the greatest of them all, Kwame Ture, aka Stokely Carmichael, And I always be like, oh, we get Joseph Robert Love, but we ain't really, but that is one of the purposes of this first book as well, is to put us on the map.
Nice.
And people will see, we had involvement in some very unique incidences, including the Amistad, where Bahamians assisted the Africans that revolted on the ship by giving them food and water for several weeks, as a matter of fact, before they ended up in the United States. But of course, they ain't gonna put that in the movie. They make a movie about an African revolt on a slave ship starring former United States President Quincy Adams. That makes sense? That's it, right? So I hope people can understand, look past my sarcasm and understand exactly where I'm coming from, and this is why our history is so important. Here we have the most famous slave revolt to ever occur on a ship, with a pretty good ending as well, particularly from our perspective, where we played a central role in it. And as a matter of fact, given our boundaries now, the revolt itself also occurred in Bahamian waters. So this is a story that we share with Cuba, that we share with the nation of Gambia and Senegal, and that we even share with African Americans. You understand? And so that's what it's about, and we all play a role in this grand fight for struggle, in which we were doing the entire time. And so my argument is, given the comments that I made earlier, us being surrounded by all of these factors, the fact that, for example, the CIA was here in the 1960s all the way up until about 1971 or so. You know what they was watching? They was watching a particular political party called Unicorn, which was considered a radical socialist pro-black African party. But they received just under 1,000 votes, I believe, in that 67 or the 68 election. And then you have notes between the CIA saying, yeah, we talked to Penland, and he said he ain't gonna do this, he ain't gonna do that. And, we need to realize these things. We love to blame leaders, but the truth of the matter is, when certainly, particularly at that time in space, I should say, when certain leaders took certain steps, they kill you. And that's the end of that. They killed Malcolm X and they killed Martin Luther King. And you have two leaders existing on different sides of the spectrums, with very, even though their ideologies were very much the same at the end of their lives. For the most of their activist careers, their ideologies were very much different. But they still treated them almost exactly the same, killing them with complete disregard, using all sorts of deceitful methodology to discredit them and ruin their families and all of these things, So, and this shows you how our history is interconnected. Of course, in the Bahamas, we also look at Martin Luther King as a great leader, as the entire diaspora does. Martin Luther King is massive in Ghana, massive in South Africa.
Wow.
So these are things that connect us, while we do appreciate our diversity. But it should not be anything past a little tease about the culture You know what I mean? And of course, done in completely good taste. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah, and that's my view on that, and that's what history will actually do. You know, and even on other sides of the spectrum, our history connects us to places like Australia. You know, when you look at the oiler side and migrations and stuff like that, you know, there are white Bahamian families that have close family that they are connected to in places like Australia, all over the world, and Europe. You know, but us as Bahamians of African descent need to try to get to that point. You see, the problem in many people's minds, which is not a problem, I should add, is that that connection is to Africa. And of course, the demonization of Africa has become so normalized that unfortunately most of us don't want to go. You pull 10 Bahamians on the side and say if you could go to any place in the world, where would it be? I doubt that two of them might say a place in Africa, you know?
Interesting.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
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 So it's incredibly important. Yeah.
I agree.
So,
And so that even shows more of the benefits of what you're doing, right? The advantage that you're giving us. You mentioned that you are a part of your mission is putting Bahamas on the map
right.
with all of the other countries that are out there, showing their history, being proud of that, representing their countries well. And so we applaud you for that.
Thank
You know, letting us be a part of the conversation that needs to happen and that needs to continue,
Of
right?
course,
Showing
yes.
that unity and embracing that sense of freedom from the things that have been cast on us from an historical perspective. And, you know, knowledge is power. A lot of persons are not familiar with many of what you're saying right now. And so this may come as a bit of a shock. This may come as a very teachable moment for them. And who knows, maybe at the end of the episode, they'll just start, you know, doing their own research, you know, trying to understand for themselves. And at that point, being able to pass on the right information to their children and other future generations. And that's a beautiful thing. That's one of the advantages of being able to express something as critical and valuable as this on an online platform.
Yes,
I
yes.
definitely must say.
So
So
I
then-
want. Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead. Go ahead. I don't know if you had another question, but you know, once I get going, I just like to, you know, I have certain things I would say, you'll get it out, you know, if that's
Okay,
okay.
no, it's no problem. So you go first, and then I'll ask the question.
And this is very close to you, actually. This is something I shared with your good cousin and one of my best friends, Tremel. You know, and what I found, one of the other aspects of our seminal research that we're doing at Sankofa Flamingo is we've actually discovered maroons in the Bahamas, right? And this is actually beyond the one case that most people are familiar with, which is those Seminoles that live in North Andros, Red Base. You know, that's the people like the McNeils, people like especially the Bowlegs, you know, and names like that. But we're talking about traditional maroon societies in New Providence in the Blue Hills region, like you would have seen, ironically, in the Blue Mountains of Jamaica. You see?
Oh.
And the name of that leader, as a matter of fact, his name, newspapers called him Jem Matthews. His real name, I would say, was Jem Dean because he was born on the Dean plantation of John C. Dean. I recall the name of the neighborhood that is currently where that plantation used to stand, because I know you have a sponsor, and I don't know if people might be, this is very vague and it's very out there, and it will connect a lot of people, and it might rub some people the wrong way, but it's a very well-known community, diverse Bahamian community, let's call it that, that where this plantation, where this man was born. So he went by Jem Dean. However, when he was captured, even though personally I believe it was a lie, but I think this is a good piece of information for you all and your family to have. When he was actually captured, and the only reason he was captured because they captured what we believe was his wife, and they was going to do some horrible things. They put the message out, yeah, we have your wife, you better come out. And then he surrendered, you know, and he actually, his final days, he was lynched, and then you never heard anything about him in the newspaper again. Lynched right in the public library, the octagon-shaped building right there next to Bank Lane. But when he was captured, he, in my opinion, it was a lie. But you know what he told them his name was? McDonald.
Oh.
Yeah, he said,
Wow.
hey man, Jem, my name McDonald. Just McDonald, that's my name. That's what he was trying to say. I think it
Ooh.
was in an effort to escape what he knew was his inevitable fate. Because
Mm.
this was a guy who, for years, even though he was pretty young, became this very infamous Maroon leader that would come into town at night, and everyone, including even black people, knew a paraphrase from the newspaper: you cross him, or you betray him, or you tell on him, you can dead very soon. So everyone know that this is a fellow who don't play. This was a Bahamian, fierce, revolutionary Maroon leader who was lynched on behalf of freedom. And this man was living next to the water reserves in the Blue Hills, surviving. You
Mm.
understand? What does that say about our history? That don't say that we was passive. That don't say we was just there. And you also had people defecting from the West India regiments joining his ranks. People running away from slave plantations joining his ranks. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
They had shootouts with the militias. So this isn't something that or this just this little thing happened here. Even though we have some even profound things that could be considered little, like the outburst of Mary Stirrup, and these are names that are very close to us. And for
Mm-hmm.
some reason, it was so odd. One thing I always found odd was that there were these focuses on names that were either no longer here or not even that common. For example, like Eve, is this great praise the Eve family and the man who invented this cotton gin. And all the man did was increase the demand for slaves in the Bahamas, which was fulfilled by an increase of influx of enslaved Africans into the Bahamas, which of course is not a good thing. You understand? So
Mm-hmm.
this is why our history is so important. Yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. So I really wanted to touch on the documentary that you're doing right now.
yeah,
One of the first times that I heard about the African connection to Junkanoo was when I had interviewed Arlene Nash Ferguson last year. And we were
right,
talking about the creative orange economy and how Junkanoo is such a huge aspect of that. Art, culture, history, it really combines all of that all in one. So
yeah,
let us know, why is it that you chose Junkanoo, something that is so relatable for all generations,
yeah.
as the topic for you to focus on for your latest documentary? And I want to let the audience know, because they may not know this, that you are in Ghana right now, live with us. So that really shows your passion because of the time difference. You're still working on the documentary and everything else that you're doing. So we thank you for that.
No
But give
problem.
our audience just a taste as to why you chose Junkanoo.
But even beyond the documentary, why I chose to research it. Again, remember I had a little bit of envy around some of my counterparts all over the world, you know, who always talking about this, and like all the heroes they have that did all these profound things that are even known outside their borders, because we talk about the Queen Nannies and stuff like that too, right? We'd be
Mm-hmm.
familiar with these people too. So, and I knew that Junkanoo was our most African celebration. As a matter of fact, from my observation, it's probably the most African expressive celebration that I see in the Caribbean. Brazil might have us though, because boy, Brazil, they carry on bad that day, to be real. But in terms of Caribbean African expressions, and it's something that even other people is like, oh yeah, but that Junkanoo, yeah, that's an African thing. And I always knew within myself, even before I discovered who the man that we know as John Canoe really was, um, that he had to have been someone profound. And it was just, like I say, when certain people and the research that was being done, it confused me, because one thing that I noticed that was common between many of the early, talking about people like Edward Long and Ida Reid, who was the first one that documented in the Bahamas prior to us doing our research, of course, where we increased that by about 80 years prior to Ida Reid now, 1721. But one thing that all of them said was they was connecting, and they were saying, oh, well, they do this in celebration of some great king in Africa, some great general, some great chief in Africa. Some of them even went as far as to say, oh, a slave trader in Africa and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, I don't think people would be celebrating a man who made a career of slave trading to this magnitude, because as we know, it exists in Belize, Jamaica, places like New Bern, North Carolina. I've actually traced it to about 14 towns, even a town in Alabama, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
I'm very excited to go to the United States and do that tour and that research and share what we have found. And Junkanoo is also connected to a revolutionary, a hunter presence, okay? And again, I like to reiterate at the end of the show that the Ahanta people are the people that we can look to, as the Jamaicans look to the Kwamu and the Ashanti, you know what I mean? As the Cubans look to the Yoruba and Nigeria, you know, these are the people that we could look to say that they are our own. And it's evident in the love that we all have. We don't know why for Junkanoo. You could get Michael Jackson, Bob Marley from the grave, James Brown, three of the best entertainers of all time. They could all have a concert. We will enjoy that concert. We will have a great time, just as much fun as everyone else. But we ain't gonna be getting too sweaty. You know, we come out there to look nice. You might have a few people dancing. Am I right or am I wrong? We can stand up right there and clap and cheer, but we ain't gonna do too much. I am a Valley boy, and if Saxons come down the road and they sound too good, I can be moving.
There you go.
Right, and I'm sure you've seen some of the viral videos after this kind of Junkanoo hiatus that we've been on. We haven't had a parade in a while because of COVID. And as we beginning to have these little rush outs, that we know we ain't nowhere close to the real Junkanoo, but these little rush out fellas all in the tree, shaking up the tree and payments were going crazy, you know. And that is because of what this man represented. He was an African general and a hunter. Safahini, king of the warriors, a Safahini, king of the warriors. Nana Safahini John Kwao the first is who we talking about. Okay, the man that we know is John Kanoo, the man we celebrate consciously now and subconsciously for many of us still. You know, a great African general that fought against the British, the Dutch, the Portuguese, and the Danish slave trade, and much later in his career, the German slave trade. A great man that was never a slave. And the more that we, even though we are not outright saying it, but the more research that we do on this man, it appears that he's not a slave trader. We've been finding receipts that he wrote, that he's been trading with these other people, and you could see how he was exploiting people. He used to charge Europeans 6 times what he charged an African for anything. And the reason he was so wealthy, and where John Kanoo came from, our theory is that he owned one of the largest canoe fleets in all of Africa. I'm not going to talk about the encounter that he had with the British on those canoes, but trust me, it was about like the more we learn about him, the more we understand why he is celebrated, why he is so loved, and the more that we understand that we could be proud as people from this land to have descended from him. The first ship that came here bringing 295 people came with warriors that were fighting and serving under this great general, John Kanoo. And that brought 295 people here, landing at another very prominent, very wealthy, very, let's say, diverse, very rich neighborhood in the Bahamas, very popular. And that, as you can see, would have had a major cultural influence, because now the majority of African descended people are now people who are very much familiar and or almost worship this man that we know today as John Kanoo, the namesake and the originator of our parade, Junkanoo, which is based on freedom, anti-colonization, anti-slavery, human rights, all of the greatest things, all of the most commendable things that humans could do. As a great political leader, black political leader, Amali Yashatela said, there's nothing more honorable than a people fighting for freedom and rights. And that is what Junkanoo is all about. And so we must continue to rush on. And there's a reason we call it rush, because it's descended from these reenactments of these great battles that John Kanoo won.
Absolutely. And you're so correct. You know, the rushing, we feel the energy, the passion. Once that Hoskin drum start going, the trumpet, I mean, that's it. It over, you know.
And don't care who it is and who you pulling for. And even you might hold it in because you just hating, because you know they sound good, and like you gotta really fight to hold that down, man. And the passion that we share for Junkanoo, and that's how I knew it was still in us, because it's the most African celebration. And you could have the Bahamian with not even an ounce of black pride, but they in the shack every night. They rushing both parades without fail, and they helping other people make Bay Street too. So how could you say that they don't have no African pride when they are such an avid Junkanooer, you know? And of course, we have to commend the Ahanta people, because even beyond John Kanoo, they have a consistent, centuries-long history of fighting against slavery and colonization. And their last king represents one of the last great kings of Ghana, Baidu Bonsu II, aka the Great Whale, who was cruelly beheaded by the Dutch and sent away and used for scientific experiments. And of course, next year we hope to see the Great Whale return. So we have to share our love and our appreciation for the Hanta people, as they have been showing us a lot of love, I assure you. And they're waiting for us to come home and visit. So I encourage people to follow the journey at Sankofa Flamingo. And of course, the door is open for all people to join us to go on this pilgrimage to Parkasu, which is the village where our hero Junkanoo is from. Yes.
Absolutely. And I just shared the connections on Facebook and TikTok for everyone to stay updated and connected. We can go along the Sankofa Flamingo journey, be a part of everything that's happening. And of course, we are looking forward to the opportunities that you mentioned, being able to connect with the Ahanta people and also taking that journey to Africa and maybe even in a sense, rediscovering ourselves as individuals and realizing what lies there in comparison to what we've been told. I think that would be a beautiful thing.
Well, I say, might be a lot, not everybody. Happened to me, happened to a few of the people that have already gone, particularly members of the organization. And it even touched some of the people in Ghana. You know, I say that people have 4 emotional experiences. And even if you're not a crier, you might cry, because we have people who are not criers and they cry. And there's 4 reasons that people cry when they go, not even just to Ghana and Ahanta, but for us, I guess it was that direct connection in the Junkanoo and everything, you know?
Yeah.
You will cry out of anger. You will cry out of sadness. You will also cry out of happiness. And then I think that you will cry just from being overwhelmed by something. Yeah. Something will overwhelm you. I've had that experience many times. I met a woman who is a splitting image of my mother-in-law. And when I say a splitting image, I would see her at the family reunion and hail her like, hey, mom, what's going on? And I'd probably had to talk to her and hear her accent to realize that that is not my mother-in-law, you know. Another profound experience I had was witnessing the cowbell and the way that they shake the cowbell just like us. For me, everyone thought I was just freaking out for no reason. And actually, me and Mike did. You know, me and Mike had a massive freak out. I was tearing up. And we was like little children in a candy store. We was like, bro, this it, like this it. It's over. It's over now. They can't deny it now. You know, they ringing cowbell just like us.
Yes.
And one thing that's very powerful, and I could end on this, you know, and this is something that makes me a little emotional. The reason they ring cowbells is not just for the musical purpose. It's actually not used. It is used in certain aspects of the music, because the Kundum Festival, which is the festival that they do, has various aspects. One that looks just like Junkanoo, where they walk down the road. One where it's 2 large circles where everyone, the whole village going around counterclockwise. Some people get bells on their feet and the bells talking with the drums, and it's like talking bells and talking incredible stuff. You know what I mean? But with the Kundum Festival, it's in October. And so there's still an opportunity for people to even go there, even though that will not be an official Sankofa Flamingo pilgrimage. We will all be there. We will be able to provide any form of assistance that people will need. Unfortunately, I won't be there in October because I will be doing some other things, and that'll be the only opportunity that I'm able to do it at that specific time. I can't say what it is, but I think people will be happy that we did that so that we could catch some of what's going on over there too, you know. Yeah, I'll close on the cowbell. Now, to get back to the cowbell, they hold it at the base. It's the same shaped cowbell. We went to other parts of Ghana, like the Fante and other places. We saw cowbells. It was being used to notify people that you are selling wares, for example. So someone will just be, and this is actually in Winneba, where they have the so-called Fancy Dress Festival. This is the one that's typically connected to Junkanoo. But even though it does share a connection to Junkanoo, I met with the president of the Winneba Fancy Dress Festival, the whole thing. And one of the founders, they just actually built a new museum that is going to be a part of the official pilgrimage, and that I would also encourage Bahamians to go and visit as well, because they waiting for us to come visit there too, even though we know Ahanta is really, where it's at.
Yeah.
But other places too where it's at too, but no other people I saw ringing this cowbell with the same propensity and with and as a part of the music and other parts as the Ahanta people did. Now, one of the reasons they do this is to kind of summon in ceremony, summon the right energy, summon the right spirits, or notify when something important happens. When I showed them the way that we ring the cowbell, and everyone know our bellas, you could argue that's the toughest job in the actual parade, and especially the ones in the back who's up the tall, off the shoulder costumes, and they just ringing that bell. He said that they believe that the reason we ring our cowbell so violently is because we were trying to summon our ancestors to rescue us from slavery.
Wow.
You understand? So anyone who tries, say, the British or the Scottish Junkanoo and all of these crazy Eurocentric theories, see that they knew that they had to appropriate this man called Junkanoo. There are even sections in Jamaica when I interviewed people about what Junkanoo is and what he represents. Someone was like, man, that's them bougie balls, them white people is having them big hotel ballroom and things like that. See, so it was a purposeful appropriation of these masquerades, and his name was so widespread, even because of the wars that he won, because it's something weird with Europeans where they even romanticize the people that was cutting the day behind. You know what I mean? You see it with people like many of the Zulu kings and queens, and you see it, of course, with people like Junkanoo. So that is something that's quite profound, and it's an absolutely magical experience to meet the Ahanta people, and the welcome that you will have. I know people may have seen that the First Lady was over there on our last trip, that we did with Bahamians, as well as some of the dignitaries, Jamal Roll and Kenneth Wallace Whitfield from Foreign Affairs, and others who all, of course, helped tremendously in this whole initiative, right? And when we went there, that trip was quite profound. And even I was shocked to see the level of welcome. They was out, and we had it before, but of course for the First Lady, they did it even bigger. And not even when we arrived to their capital, we arrived at a city called Takoradi, which is one of the largest cities in the region, the largest city in the region, actually. And they had a whole big Junkanoo rush out, drums on the side, a group of girls dancing here, a group of young men dancing there. They make up a whole song about me. I had to go on the side and cry, because you ain't supposed to cry when you have on your, you know what I mean? I was
you care and stuff.
By the whole thing, and they singing my name and saying thank you for bringing the Ahanta people who have been taken in slavery back home, and that's what they sing. And they have a whole dance, and it was all in our honor, So even if I'm not there, as a Bahamian, we don't even have to be there. You just go there, find your way to Princess Town, tell them who you are. Man, I'm from the Bahamas. I see what John Quao II, aka Christopher Davis, been doing, man. And we come to check it out. We just want to be a part of the culture. We want to see the fort. We want to do this, what's going on with anything, and they will treat you like royalty, like literally. I'm not even exaggerating. And it's funny that they have this kind of natural hospitality that we also have.
Yes.
This is also a part of our so-called tourism industry, and that is what I think we need to move Stafford Sands from that $10 bill, put a maid, put a taxi driver, put a pilot, and a stewardess or something like that. You understand? 2 women, 2 men. Put them on the $10 bill. This is the face of tourism. It is because of us and because of our culture why people continuously come to the Bahamas. If we didn't utilize our waters and all these things through our culture, the things we do on the daily, through our hospitality, through the way anyone you see a foreigner and they ain't from around there, you got 5 people around them trying to tell them where to go. And everyone's trying to have a different way to go. But they can get there. You understand what I'm saying? Yes. And it's a part of our hospitality. And of course, we know that we are also Gullah Geechee people. And the Gullah Geechee people mostly reside in the southeast of the United States. And what they say, Southern hospitality. Well, we in the deeper south, and we a little more hospitable than them. You know what I mean? So, and not hospitable in the sense of course, you are proverbially tap dancing for these people. You know, again, it's a difference between service and servitude.
Yes.
You know, hospitality to guests is actually an African thing. And to quote Dr. Clark again, that tragic naivety and our natural friendliness, our natural hospitality, our natural innate need to love and not hate. We see someone different than us, we curious, we even love. We say, oh, what's that, man? Yeah, man, what you got? What type of food you was eating, all that. Unlike others who, when they see, oh, I hate them, we got to enslave them, you know. And you could see the difference in psyche, which is a discussion for another day. But yeah, thanks for having me on again, you know.
You're welcome. And thank you so much for your transparency. I mean, in all aspects of it, you have truly shown us why this is a passion for you, yes, why you're dedicated. You know, you have been touched by everything that you have discovered. And the thing is, there's so much more to learn and to know. And you've just given us just a small perspective of the Sankofa Flamingo journey.
Tip of the iceberg. We have so much content. We have enough content. We could start our own Netflix just on Bahamian history, you know? Yeah, we have a lot of content. And of course, we looking for people to get involved in any capacity, you know, whether you want to be a physical part of the organization or, you know, whether you just want to come on this one trip or whether you want to help out in one of our outreach initiatives and adopt a specific school, you know, in Africa. This is not that proverbial volunteerism thing. This is not that foreign savior, white savior, perpetual thing. This is something that we do, but you will not see publicized as much on social media. However, if you are interested, you can come and you can see what we do in that aspect, because we know that publicizing these things too much on social media leads to all of the problems that we see with volunteerism, of which missionary groups are mostly guilty of. You know, where they pretty much just do these trips that mean nothing, and they do more harm than good in Africa, and perpetuate, of course, certain stereotypes as well.
Thank you for that. And I'm sure that a lot of people appreciated that invitation, knowing that they can not only just hear everything that you have stated about the experience, but knowing that they can be a part of it as well. I'm sure you have people who are excited about that. And so that's amazing. So we have a comment from Christovan. He said you should produce content. And I know that that's something that you guys are actively working on.
Oh, yeah, it's coming. The problem is monetization in the Bahamas. You know, yeah, that's one of the, I'm sure you familiar with that.
Yes.
I get some of your advice on that, because I don't know. You know, and right now we have so much going on that much of us are stretched very thin. And we are actually looking for somebody to pretty much, with all the autonomy, you know, that's how we do it. Even though I am the leader, we don't have these kind of subordinate positions within the organization. Everyone has a particular expertise, and they are listened to in their zone, you know, and they have complete autonomy and authority within their zone, you know. So we actually looking for somebody who could keep me disciplined and be like, listen, but you got to do this podcast, and hey, come, you there, yeah, this time, this, don't forget you up this. And because I get bored of social media, I hate the toxicity. It's all very trivial to me. It don't matter. I don't like people to know what you know. My favorite African queen, I like to tell people, is Mindy Yabu Sinis. And when you spell it out, it's mind your business. See what I said? So yeah, I just kind of like that. And it's not that I hate social media per se, and I don't like people, and I don't like interacting with people. It's just that I focusing on so much other things all the time, and I see so much things that trigger me on social media, particularly history. And so much people come to me and say, oh, but I got this historical document, and when I look at it, it's a meme. And I just be like, you know, anybody could make a meme saying anything. And I can tell you off the bat that this isn't true, and because of this and that. Like how people say Africans populated all of the Americas. You know, we were here, we had influence, but indigenous Americans were not quote unquote African / black people. Sorry about that. Sorry to burst your bubble, you know, for those that were thinking that. But we have to get deep into our own history and
Yeah.
stop doing this mental gymnastics to deny what actually happened and start to think about things of like not just repatriation, as I've touched on a little bit, but reparations. And reparations is not just them cutting you a check, but it's things like debt cancellation. And we have great minds like Dr. Nyambi Campbell Dean, who is the chairperson of the Bahamas Reparations Committee, that people could also feel free to reach out to get involved with as well. And to put it simply, I mean, I don't mean to trivialize the reparations movement. Plenty of these people we talking about get plenty money for us. And so even if you want to appreciate the Pan-Africanism and all that, if you got a Scottish surname like you, Miss McDonald, or Welsh surname like me, Mr. Davis, yeah, they owe you plenty. So if even just for that, for the next generation, for them to have it better, to be able to reap those benefits, we should all at least be sympathetic and support this, even if it's just in saying that you are supportive of it, you know?
Yes.
Sharing and all of this stuff, right?
I agree. Thank you so much for that. So, audience members, you've heard it here. There are multiple opportunities for you to be a part of this experience. It is going to be unforgettable, incredible, something that you can pass on to your children, to your other family members. And you know what? There is nothing like being able to reconnect with yourself, understanding where you come from, you know, what you've been created from, and the beauty of all of that. Absolutely. So Robin has shared the social media connects on there as well. And Chris says that he follows you guys. So that is great. I know you guys are going to get more followers from this. People are excited.
You know,
so mo-Shango, I do want to thank you for reminding us of the depths of our Bahamian history, the power of reconnecting with our roots, and why historical research is imperative to preserving who we are for generations to come. Sankofa Flamingo is doing an amazing, remarkable job in the works for Bahamian history and creating a path for Bahamians to reconnect with their African roots, especially through your current documentary. For more information on how you can be a part of this entire experience in any way, whether it's traveling, volunteering, just bringing any of the strengths that you have, you can connect with mo-Shango at sankoflamingo@gmail.com. You can, of course, stay connected on Facebook at Sankofa Flamingo and also TikTok, Sankofa_Flamingo, and check out their YouTube as well. As a reminder, this episode is proudly sponsored by Amber L. A special thank you to our audience members who have been consistently watching and commenting. And of course, to our guest speaker, Christopher mo-Shango Davis, who is leading the movement along with his team of the conscious awakening of our history with a fiery passion. We can't wait to see your next steps and to learn more about your continued impact. If you've missed the first half of the show, we invite you to watch the full replay on this page. And of course, to stay tuned for another episode of Vibration, where we raise your frequency and amplify your truth. See you next week. Bye.
Bye.